So listen carefully. I begin with Isaiah 6, 1 through 8. I want you to listen for the images of God. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him, each with 6 wings, and with 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The pivots on the threshold shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed, and your sin is blotted out. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here I am, send me. Now I'm going to turn to Romans 8, and I'm going to read 12 through 17. Romans 8, 12 through 17. Listen again for the image of God. So then, brothers and sisters, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are children of God. For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you received a spirit of adoption. When we cry, Abba, Father, it is the very Spirit bearing witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ. If in fact we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. And finally, from Matthew 28, 16 to the end of the chapter, 16 to 20. Now, the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And remember, I am with you always to the end of the age. So what's this Sunday in some traditions? Trinity Sunday. And Trinity is the idea of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which some people get really confused about. In fact, in some non-Christian traditions, they say we worship 3 gods. Traditionally, it's one God with 3 expressions, 3 ways of referring to God, 3 ways of understanding God. And truthfully, in the Christian Church Disciples to Christ, this denomination, there are some who emphasize the 3 and some who emphasize the 1. So there's a variety of ways in our tradition of understanding God, which gives me the freedom to invite you into an exploration of who God is and how you experience God. So I hope you were listening to the scriptures this morning, because I found these particular 3 scriptures wonderful ways of imagining, understanding, experiencing God. If we were to go around this room, which we don't have time to do, and each of us say how we experience God, we'd find more than the number that are gathered here, right? Because we each experience God in various marvelous ways. And all are godly. So, I come up with the first image from Isaiah. Here I am, send me. This is a historic passage, often used by ministers at their ordination, because it says, here I am, who will I send? Send me, says Isaiah. But if you look at the text, if you listen very carefully, you know that Isaiah has a vision of God as a great king on a magnificent throne. And it's so big, what does he see? Did you catch that? Only the hem of the garment that God wears. But Isaiah knows he's in the presence of the great King God, who is glorious and marvelous above all, just by seeing the hem of God's robe. And Isaiah, you need to understand, it's in a time when King Uzziah has died. So they're looking for someone to rule. And Isaiah makes it clear, who's the ruler above all rulers? God. God. Then, you also need to know that Isaiah is a mere 16 years old, a young boy. And he's so struck by this vision of God that when in the vision God says to him, whom shall I send? What does he say? Send me. So this young boy has a vision, feels called, and commits himself to go out and be the prophet for God, which you have to understand wasn't the most popular job in the country. You know, to tell people how they fail to be godly people, we don't usually want to hear that, do we? So it was a pretty unpopular job, and yet this young boy commits himself and spends the rest of his life telling what God would have him tell. So you need to understand that that's what's going on. That's why it's important that King Uzziah died, because God is the king above all kings. Now we go to Romans, and I don't know if I would have picked this one, except that Sister Carla pointed it out on my Tuesday morning Bible study group, and I had to admit, going back to it, I just loved it. So in this image in Romans 8 is one of my favorite texts in the Bible, so go read it. It's all about the Spirit. And so here are images that pop out of this text. And in this small portion, 12 through 17, the whole chapter is wonderful. But in this small portion, 12 through 17, Paul, a disciple of Jesus, who never was there with Jesus, even persecuted Jesus, but has been transformed, is proclaiming his experience of God. And he says, now, you may be tempted by the flesh. I heard a text this week that really helped me with this, and we are body, and we cannot escape body. So I don't want to say that all body is bad, which can be drawn from this text. But I want you to hear in this that Paul's introducing us to the Spirit. So while we're enfleshed in body, it's limited. And Paul says we need to embrace the Spirit because these bodies will die. And with the Spirit we'll live. And if we live in the Spirit with Christ, then whether or not we suffer, we will be glorified just as Christ is glorified. And that's a marvelous image. There in the middle of the text, though, did you hear how God's described? Father, Abba. We hear Father all the time, but this image of God as Father is a powerful image. And it can be very jarring if you haven't had a good father, but it can be very comforting if you have a good father, or if you know good men who are great fathers. The other thing you need to know is that it uses the word Abba, which is an affectionate name. It's the kind of thing a child would say to their daddy. So it's like saying, Daddy. So we're invited into a relationship with God in which we become what? Children of God, heirs to the promise. That's what the text says. So we become part of the family of God. And this God who was high and lifted up in Isaiah is now so intimate. He's like a father. Not only that, it's like a father who's very approachable. Daddy, who you can go to and talk to no matter what. Now, isn't that a wonderful image for God? Abba, Father. Now we're going to go to Matthew and the image there. And you may not have even recognized that there's an image there, but it is. It is. You see, the disciples, the 11, go to the top of the mountain where Jesus has said he'll meet them. And mountains are always synonymous with God, because it's on the mountain that Moses receives the 10 Commandments. Many happy, holy things happens on mountains. How many of you been to the top of a mountain? How many of you been to the top of the arch? Okay. Imagine the top of the arch multiplied, looking over marvelous landscape. And you've got the top of the mountain, okay? And if you've been to the top of the mountain, my sister was just at the top of the mountain in Appalachia with a woman, and she said, when you're up here on the top of the mountain, it's just holy. It's just holy. So they're up on the holy mountain, and Jesus appears to them. And he is taken away from them at this moment. But before he goes, he says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey all that I have commanded you. And remember, I am with you always to the end of the age. So what kind of relationship is set up here? We're collaborators with Christ. Do you hear that? Christ goes, and the responsibility of telling the story falls on us. Co-workers, collaborators, partners, people of God. That's the relationship that's set forward here at the end of Matthew. We catch a little bit of the holy, and then we are inspired, we are challenged, we are invited to go out and tell the story of Jesus and his love. Imagine that. What an image. Now, you may not want to join into that image because, you know, it's got some responsibility attached to it, but what a marvelous way to live. When I think about call, I probably had to think about this more than many of you, because when you become a minister, they talk to you a lot about what's your call. I can see Lorna smiling. She's been a minister. Glenn's a minister. Carla's a minister. Al's a minister. All of us, really, in our tradition, are ministers in Jesus Christ. The question is not if you're called, from my perspective.